Right, in this question, we're going to look at how we use completing the square to firstly solve a quadratic, and then what it also helps in terms of the graph, finding a minimum point. Right, so let's go with this question first. So the first thing we do when it comes to completing the square is we are going to halve the coefficient. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm rewriting the equation in a different way. I don't want to change any part of it, any of the values. Okay, so what I mean by this is I'm going to write x plus, and if I halve 10, it's going to give me 5. And I'm going to write squared. So if I actually wrote this out, what squared means, it would get me x squared plus 10x plus 25. So notice how when I square the x plus 5, it's giving me an extra 25 that is not in the original equation. So I'm going to subtract that 25, which is 5 squared. Okay, so maybe I should write that first, just so you can see what I'm doing with this. So whatever number's inside the bracket, I'm going to subtract that squared. But then you can't forget about the 10 that's already in that equation. So then what I'm going to do next is, just to simplify it a little bit, is we know that 5 squared is 25, plus 10 is 0. So I should have, at this point, negative 15 is 0. So this is what we call completing the square. Why is this useful? So here, this tells me the minimum point of my quadratic. So when I draw the quadratic, it tells me what the minimum point is. So here, my x is whatever's inside the bracket. However, you have to change the sign. So because this is a positive 5, that means it's negative 5. And then whatever comes outside is going to be my y. That doesn't change. So this is my minimum point on a graph. Okay, not that graph, but a graph. Now I can solve this quadratic by literally just solving it. So add 15 to both sides. We're going to have x plus 5 squared is 15. And then we're going to square root both sides. So x plus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 15. And then I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So x equals negative 5 plus or minus root 15. Which makes sense because I'm going to have it's going to cross the x-axis at 2 places. So this is just so you can have a little bit of a clearer look, not looking at my handwriting. But if we look at this in more detail on the actual graph, this is going to be my minimum point, okay? And then this is going to be where it crosses the x-axis, this is where it crosses the y, okay? So let's plot them important points. So first, we have, it's going to cross the y-axis at 10. The next thing, it's going to cross the x-axis at negative 5 plus or minus root 15. So if I add root 15 to negative 5, we're going to estimate it's around here. And if we subtract it, we're going to estimate it's around here. When I draw my sketch, I now know negative 5 and negative 15 was my minimum point. So we can say that's about here. So I know all that information without looking at the graph and just using completing the square. So you have your minimum point, and you have where it crosses the x-axis. Okay? So let's have another little go of using completing the square. So step 1 is we are going to halve this coefficient. So x minus 4 squared. Then we have to subtract negative 4 squared. And then don't forget about that 5. So we should have on that next line, negative 4 squared is 16. So it'll always be a subtraction because when you square any number, it's positive anyway. And then plus 5 is 0. So x minus 4 squared, negative 16, add 5 is negative 11. Then I'm going to add 11 to both sides. X minus 4 squared is 11. Then square root both sides. So x minus 4 is plus or minus root 11. And then I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So my answer for this question is x equals 4 plus or minus root 11. And don't forget, we know what our minimum point is. In this question, it is 4 and negative 11. So remember, the x value inside that bracket will change. So if it's a positive, it's a negative. If it was a negative in this question, it's a positive. Right, the last question, there is a view of it nice and neat, In this last question, notice how there's a 2 in front of the x squared. How do we deal with this? Well, first, I could factorize. So I have a quadratic inside. Sorry, it's not 12, it's 6. So 6x and then minus 4 is 0. But then you could just divide the whole thing by 2, because 0 divided by 2 is 2. And then you are left with x squared minus 6x minus 4 is 0. Then you use completing the square method. Minus 6 squared minus 4 is 0. So x minus, not 6 squared, sorry, that should be 3. So x minus 3 squared, sorry, that last bit. And then we're going to minus 9, minus 4 is 0. So x minus 3 squared minus 9 minus 4 is negative 13 is 0. And then if you go on to solve that, your answer should be x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 13. So if you have a number here for a, you can literally just divide the whole thing by that number. So in this example, I divided the whole thing by 2 and then just using completing the square like normal.